So again, I closed my image, so I've got the image now that has the spills back on. You know, I need to choke the edge, all that kind of stuff, but that's not what I'm going to worry about right now. I just want to deal with the shadow part of this right now, because again, I've figured out what caused the problem, or not the problem. They've changed the gradient tool now. They've updated it in the latest version of Photoshop, and actually it's nice because it keeps the gradient editable forever. So you could save your file, close it up, open it up in 10 years and be able to continue to edit your gradient, which you can't really with the old tool. But it doesn't let us do transforms, and that's what we need to be able to do the shadow building that I'm going to show you guys right now. So again, I'm going to add a blank layer on top of my background, but underneath my figure. So I'm just going to click on, yes. Then come up to very close to the word where it says Adobe at the very top, and double click to either side of that really fast. You might be on the pasteboard. Hit the F key once. Did it go black? Here, hang on. No, you don't have to turn it off. So try to connect the menu, and you can go on to workspace, and then go to reset it. Okay, so everybody got this blank layer underneath. I want to name this shadows. Typically I'll do this as shadows 1. Shadows are, for the most part, compound things, meaning that they're not all just black and white, whatever. They're different shapes and that kind of stuff. So when you're building the shadow to go underneath a foot, for instance, the area that's right underneath the front part of the shoe, the toe part of a shoe, is going to be probably a different shadow than the shadow that's underneath the open space until you get back to the heel, because more light could actually come in underneath that open space. So again, the shadow that's underneath here is going to be different than the one that's underneath here. And so having multiple layers to actually control these shadows actually makes a lot of sense, but I'm getting probably deeper into it than we need to. So I'm going to just call this shadow 1. And say OK to that. Hit the G key, which will get you the gradient tool. Again, if you come up now to your options palette, the first thing we need to set is the kind of gradient. So see where it says the word gradient? If you click on the drop-down menu, you will see that you can do gradient, which is the new tool, or classic gradient, which is the old one, which is the one we want to use. So pick classic gradient. If you do not have these options, you have not upgraded to the latest version of Photoshop, and it won't matter because you will only have the classic version of this. So then click on the drop-down menu for the type of gradient that you want, the relationship. Open up the basics folder, and you want to pick the one in the middle, which is again foreground color to transparency. And then finally, of the 5 icons that are to the right of that, you want to pick the second one from the left. That is the radial gradient. And then this is how you actually do it. I do this pretty much exclusively with a tablet and a mouse. So just watch my screen really quickly here, and I will show you the method that I go through for all of this. I'm going to click and drag out. It gives me a gradient that, again, is going from, in the center here, you can see very dark, out. It fades out to nothing, ultimately, which is exactly what we want. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see this. What I need to do is flatten this gradient so it's more like a shadow. So if you grab the handle that's in the very top in the middle and drag it down, you'll see that you begin to crush your gradient. Well, that's kind of fine, but the truth of it is I really want this to be crushed equally from the top to the bottom. I'm trying to flatten this disc so that I can actually shape it and move it in to be the shadow. So instead of actually grabbing the top handle and dragging it down and the bottom handle dragging it up, if you hold down the Option key and grab your top handle and drag down, it will bring the bottom handle up with it. And what you want to do is drag this down till you get a pretty flat disc. Then, still holding down the Option key because this is too wide for us to work on, I want to then grab the handle that's on the far right-hand side and drag it in to reshape it a little bit. And then finally,
mine's like only does it equally if it stays in the square.
we will look at how you have your preferences set up by the end of class. If we don't get to it before, we'll check on that.
Okay.
All right. Finally, realize that if you bring your cursor outside of the bounding boxes, you don't touch any of the handles in there, just bring it on the outside, you can actually rotate this thing. So what I want to do is rotate it slightly to line it up. I'm trying to build the shadow that's going to go underneath the front part of her shoe. Then if you put your cursor right in the middle, be careful, because if you put it on the anchor point, which is in the very center, and you move that, all you do is move the anchor point. You don't move the shadow. So come off to the side, you'll get just a black-headed triangle. You can click and you can reposition this and you can continue to rotate it. But what I'm looking to do is get the major part of the black part of that shadow right underneath the front part of her shoe. That's what I'm trying to do. It still is too wide now. I want to make this a little bit more narrow. So I'm going to again hold down the Option key and click on the handle that's sort of at 6 o'clock to make it a little bit thinner. And then finally, I'm just going to sit OK. So if you click on the check mark that's at the very top, this actually does the beginning of your shadow. Now, I've got shadow that's right in front of her. If you want to see the shadow itself, turn the eyeball on and off, and you can see I've got shadow that's in front of her shoe. That would never happen. If the light is coming down on her, the shadows happen under her shoe. They don't happen. Look at this, my screen right here. This is happening in front of her shoe. There's nothing to explain that shadow. So you hit the E key to get your eraser, and you don't change anything because you've already set this eraser up. And as long as you don't ever change anything, it'll work great for you from now on. And I'm simply going to get rid of that part. I'm just scrubbing back and forth to get rid of that shadow that's actually happening in front of her shoe that would never be there. So this is the one that I'm actually doing on this side. I'm going to do another one on the other side, but to do it, I'm going to make a separate layer to do this. So I'm going to simply click on New Layer. I'm going to call it Shadow 2. And again, the G key to get the gradient tool. Click and drag out. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Hold down the Option. Crush this shadow. Bring it down, move it around. Hold down your Option key to make it much, much skinnier. Much flatter, much skinnier, and then bump it up into place. That's sort of like right underneath her foot. If your shadow wants to, if the movement part wants to jump around too much for you, you can always go to your arrow keys and just tap your arrow keys, and then it'll go down 1 pixel at a time. So I'm going to bring mine down a little bit more. That seems about right to me. I'm going to click the check mark here. I've now got the shadow that's underneath her foot, but I've also got it's coming out on both sides too much. Again, there's nothing that explains the shadow that's on both the left side of her shoe and the right side of her shoe. So the E key immediately and scrub away those parts that are on the side. This whole shadow still needs to come down a little bit more. So I'm going to go back, hit the V key to get the move tool, and then simply drag the shadow down a little bit more, or use my arrow keys to tap it down a little bit more like that. And then even at this stage of the game, I'm going to do one last shadow here really quickly. So I'm going to click on the, again, add another brand new layer, call this Shadow 3. And this is what I mean about multiple shadows doing this part. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out. The two shadows that I've actually got in here right now, there's the one on the left shoe is going back a little too far. That needs to be cleaned up a little bit. However, if you still think about the light that's coming on here, we've got shadows that's being cast by the shoes, but there's also a shadow that's being cast by her entire body. But it's nowhere near as dark as these primary shadows that are underneath her shoe, because you've got all of this area around her body that's letting light come in and hit the area where the shadow her body is casting would be. So again, this last one, the G key to get the gradient tool. Click and drag a big one out so that I get a really big gradient here. Command T to actually get my transform handles up. Hold down the Option key, and I'm going to compress this, and then I'm going to move it down, and I'm going to put it right underneath her body. I'm also now, in this case, I'm not going to narrow the shadow down to make it less, to reduce its width, I'm actually going to drag that out. I'm going to make the shadow wider, because you can see as I start to go out to transparency, that actually needs to be, by the time I get to the edge of her shoes, that shadow needs to be gone. It needs to be, because there's nothing that would explain it being cast. So again, I'm going to make this a little bit narrower, a little bit flatter. Can I do the whole, oh, move here, yes, I can, I think. Does that help? All right, sorry. All right. So I'm still moving this around. I'm getting it kind of in place like that. That feels about right to me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my check mark to say okay to that. Hit the E key immediately and start erasing all of the stuff that's on the sides. Make my eraser much larger because you can do a really big hit on this. Now, when I look at this right now, I still think that my shadow it's too tall. I need to narrow the distance from the top of my image to the bottom of my image. It's still too broad. You can transform again. Command T will simply bring back the handles again. I'm going to flatten it out a little bit more so I can continue to refine this. And that feels about right to me. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that, hit the check mark. But now again, this shadow is just as dark as the shadows that are underneath her feet, and that would not be the case. So to fix that, I'm going to drop the opacity of this layer. So if you take a look at your layers palette up at the very top, again, this shadow number 3 is the one that is selected. The layers palette that's at the top, I'm just going to start dragging the opacity of this back. And you want to come back pretty serious on this. Even though it may not seem like much, I'm down to around a 35, 37% of my shadow. And you say, well, it's gone. You've gotten rid of it. But if you turn this thing on and off, you can actually see, no, that is not true. And you can also see I've got shadow that's going way out on both sides that I also still needs to get rid of. E key to actually get that and erase all the stuff that's out to the sides of this to make sure it's only the part that's underneath her. Then maybe push it, the opacity up a little bit more on that. Double click on the hand. So then this is the anchoring. That's still the shadow. It's still too dark underneath her. So even though I said that, I'm going to drop this down even more. Yeah, until it's barely perceptible. And so this is the anchoring. To see what this looks like before and after, create a history snapshot of this right now. So just click on the little camera at the bottom of your history palette, and we'll call this with shadow. And say okay to that. And then scroll up to the very top of your history palette. And you can click on the state when you first opened your image, the choke and spread state that has no shadows, and then click on the one with shadows, and you can go back and forth between these. So it turns on all the layers all at once, and you can see it anchors the girl into the space. Did that work for everyone? Did that not work for anyone? Now you can close this guy up. You don't need to save this. For a little while, we're not going to be using the trackpad. Next thing, homework. We're now going to do your homework. So again, in your retouching class, go to your session number 5. Inside that, there is an assignment folder, and inside that assignment folder is this 081025 Verser VER fashion. If you can open that up, it's a headshot. Double click on the hand to get it open. Say what? Oh, so if it's again opening in preview, find the file, do a get info on it. So file, get info. And in this little drop down open with dialog, you need to click on this and change it. Yours will say preview. You need to change it from preview down to Photoshop. Did that work? But before you close that up, if you want all of these files to open in Photoshop, then you click on this change all button that's underneath and then say okay, and it'll change all of them. Okay, So back to this image. So again, I want to knock this image out, and the methods that we've used so far in this class involve basically doing this with channels, or we could try to use the select and mask workspace. We could do all of those. But I want to look at strategies here that I think are far more targeted, and I want to show you the one that I use 90% of the green screen work that I do, and this is mostly what I do. This is how I make, this is the work that I do, is this kind of stuff right here. So I'm going to go through the two methods first that you should already know. Well, one you should definitely know. One you're going to need a little work on. Then I'm going to introduce you to a brand new one. Okay, so the first one is to look for a channel for this. So I'm going to go and look at my red channel here. And again, what I'm looking for now is contrast between the hair. The hair is the challenge here. It's not her skin. I can use the pen tool to get her skin. That's not a problem. But the hair, separating the hair from the background. When I look at the red channel, it's almost identical to the background, so that's not usable for me. I'm going to then click on the green channel, and that's better. I've at least got some hair that I can work with here in a lighter background, darker hair, lighter background. And then finally I'm going to go to the blue channel, and the blue channel takes me back to worse again, because again, the hair color is darker, but the background is considerably darker. So there's not a lot of separation between these two. So it's going to be the green channel. I'm going to copy the green channel by simply grabbing the channel and dragging it down to the icon at the bottom of the channels palette. That's the little square with the plus in the middle, and let go. It'll make a new channel for me called Green Copy. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to call this Channel Knockout. And say OK. And then I'm going to do exactly what we've done before. I'm going to zoom in to the curls that are, if you imagine her face as a clock, I'm going to come into the curls that are right around 3 o'clock. And again, what I'm looking for here is, what in this hair do I know should be absolutely black? I don't trust anything along this edge down in here. If you can see the screen where I'm working at right here, I don't trust any of that to be totally black. I think that there's a lot of transparent hair here that's actually letting light come through. The intersection of hair that's right in here, I feel like that probably is a good legitimate candidate for being black. The outside curl on here, the darker version of it, I feel like that could actually be an absolute black, and that's probably the one that I'm going to go after. So I need to set color sampler points to get a readout of these values. So click on the eyedropper tool to get the flyout menu. We do not want to select the eyedropper tool. We want to select the color sampler tool. It's the third one down. Then come over here, and I'm going to click on a spot that's the darkest of that bit of hair that's right on the edge. I'm going to put a color sampler point right there. Again, make sure that your sample size is a 3x3, not a point sample size, but at least a 3x3. And then I'm going to do another sample on the background, but I'm struggling on this background because there's a lot of there's hair that I'm worried about hitting all of this background. I can sort of get a spot right here and in between, sort of like a couple of hairs that I don't feel like I've got anything there. So that's going to be my second. That's going to be for my background color. So I have a color sampler readout for her hair and another one for the background color. If you look over at your info palette and your drop-down menu, you will see that you've got a sample point number 1 and a sample point number 2. That represents the values that are underneath these two sample points respectively. If you need to move your sample point, you can simply hover over it and it'll actually allow you to move it as long as you've got that tool selected. If you don't have that tool selected, hold down the Shift key and you'll temporarily be able to move it. But anyway, these are going to work for me. I need to change the readout of my point number 1 and 2 from giving me CMYK values. That's why you have K in the readout. I'm going to click on the drop-down menu and say I want you to show this to me in RGB readouts. Do that for both of them. And now you can see what your goal is. You've got this first point, and I'm in the high 40s. You should be close to this if you're doing this with me. I've got a background that's in the high 140s, 130s, low 140s, high 130s. That needs to go to white. So again, I'm still working just on this channel knockout. Command L to bring up my levels dialog box. I'm going to grab the black and white point slider and start to drag it towards the center. watching my after readout. I'm looking at my point number 1 here. I'm looking at the readout. Again, the left side of your readouts don't change. The right side of your readouts change depending on what you're doing with a curve or levels adjustment slider or whatever. So I'm close to getting it to a black value. I've got 4s here. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and just tap it in until I just get to 0s. Then I'm going to grab my white point and start to drag it towards the center. Again, looking at the readout that's on the opposite side. And I'm going to get this close to 255. I'm going to back that off because I went too far. I'm at a 246. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and tap this in until I just hit 255. I'm going to revisit my shadow point because you can see it went from 0. It got popped up to a number 1. So I'm going to click on that point to make it active again and then still go back to my arrow keys. So I've just barely gotten into here and then, sorry. To really see what I've got going here. And you can see I'm trashing her face. I don't really care about that part. I can go in and get that in a different way, but I'm looking at the edge that I've actually got going on here. I'm going to use my preview on and off to say, yep, okay, this is actually looking pretty good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. And this would be the beginning of your knockout. Again, the thing that we're left with here is that we don't have her skin. All of that part's actually gone. So to fix that, I'm going to go up to the top of my channels palette. I'm going to click on the RGB value to get, so I can see my entire image. I am going to go to the pasteboard now though, because I want to be able to use my pen tool outside of the image itself. So I'm going to hit the F key to get to the pasteboard, and then I'm going to hit the P key to get to the pen tool. And if you've never changed any of your settings for the pen tool, everything will be set up correctly. You will have a path selected at the top. You will have in the gear drop down that the rubber band is set to be on, and that your check mark by your auto add and delete points are on. I'm going to start up on her lower left ear, and I'm going to simply do a quick outline of the left side of her face. You guys can do this with me. Again, you'll see that her face is breaking up on the left side. That's an indication that it's falling out of focus. I'm going to get rid of that part of her skin that's just falling apart, so I'm going to do my pen tool line just inside that part because I want to get rid of it. And then I'm going to come down on her neck and grab all of that and also get rid of all those straggly hairs that are on the side. And her shirt. And then I'm out on the pasteboard. I'm just going to step my way over till I get to her other neck side. And I'm just going to then continue my path work up there. And hold down the Option key to kick around. I am going to get the rest of her ear on the right side, not her whole ear, just the whole bottom part of it. That's all I really want. So then at this point you have to ask yourself, do we continue to work around to get her face in this, or do we do it to actually get the background? I'm going to go ahead and do her face in this, so I'm simply going to bring my pen tool over and hit a couple of points in between to close the path again, and then I'm going to just click on it to close the path. Then I'm going to go to my path palette and double click on the word that says work path, and I'm going to call this lower face and say okay to that. Then I'm going to load this as a selection, hover over the thumbnail, hold down the command key or control key and click to load this as a selection. Again, I don't want this to be perfectly selected. I need to soften this just a little bit. So up to the select menu, down to modify, down to feather, and I'm going to do a full 1 pixel feather on this and say okay to that. And then I'm going to go back to my channel knockout. So again, the thing at the very bottom, the channel that I was trying to build to be this mask, I've now got this area is actually selected for her. On my mask, I actually need this part to be black because I'm trying to make my background white, this part black. So I am going to change, so I'm going to fill this right now with black. Black is my foreground color. Option delete fills it. Yes.
My path is like inverted. It's the gray part that I selected and the white part.
Got it. I'm glad you brought that whole part up because we're going to have to cover that while you're doing this. So we'll get path selected like this. How much to use? It's this thing right here, these squares right here. Click on it, you're going to jump down menu. These haven't been how everybody done that. Click on it to done shape. One. Okay, while we've still got the marching ants going, I can actually then work on this edge for my background. So to do that, if I were to paint with a brush right now, it would only paint on the center part of this mask. It wouldn't paint on the outside of it. It would only paint on the center part of this. To actually be able to paint on the outside, I need to invert my selection, because right now if you hit the B key to get a brush, hit the X key to make white your foreground color, and then start to paint here on the center, you'll see it'll paint on the center part because this is still the selected part, but it will not paint white on the outside part here at all because, again, the selection is controlling where I can paint. So I'm going to go back in time, Command Z's to undo that, and then I'm going to invert my selection. Up to the Select menu, down to Inverse. Again, I'm not inverting my image, I'm inverting the selection. And now you can see the marching ants on the inside didn't change, but I've now got a whole set of marching ants that are on the outside. That's telling me that the inside is now not selected, the area of her chin and her neck are not selected, but the area outside of it is. And still with my brush, I'm going to then clean up this edge right here on the outside to get rid of all those little flyaway hairs. Again, I'm going to stay away from her ears and the flyaway hairs that are up at the very top. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. There's some weird little feathery hairs that are on that side over there. And I'm just going to get rid of all of that part, Command D to deselect. And then, yes? Are you talking about your path?
Yeah.
So I've got to show this one. I can't go over that part. So, oh. So, save this image right now. Save it. Yeah, we're going to make sure that we save it as a and again, it's homework, so save it where you can get to it. Okay, that's fine. Don't save. Save it. Put those on. You already saved it. All right, so is this working for the rest of you guys? Right? So then that allows me to just clean up the white edges. So all the little feathery hairs that are sitting out here, you can just paint those with a white brush because the selection will not let you paint onto her neck or cheek. Is that working? Okay. We good on this part? Okay, so I'm going to leave the hair pretty much where it is. We can figure out the rest of this. So Command D to deselect. I've just got a regular brush. I'm going to make this a completely hard brush. We're not going to completely finish this version because it's the weakest of them all. But, sorry. But if you hit the X key again to get black, you can actually then paint in all the part right here that's next to her face. Again, stay away from the edges. You've done all of that work using luminosity to get those edges. Don't change that part, but I can paint all of this to get rid of all of that. I can do this part of her hair, which I know needs to be black. The only thing I'm missing here would be her ear. I would actually take time to pen tool her ear, but for time's sake, I'm just going to paint this with a brush really quickly. And this part of her ear as well. And the rest of that stays open. All the stuff that's at the top, this is all needs to be part of the mask. Again, it's highlights on her hair, that kind of stuff. Stay away from the edges. I'm gonna zip back out. And then finish the rest of her face. All of this. So this would be the beginning of it. Again, I would go in and refine this a little bit more. We need to do overlay brush on the edges of the hair that are running along here. We would need to go ahead and clean that up. But again, you guys get the basic idea of this, right? So I'm going to load this as a selection. Command click to load it as a selection. I'm going to go back to my layers palette. I'm going to make a duplicate of my second layer, a copy of this bottom layer. I've got a selection going right now. If I make a copy, it's going to make a copy of this selection. I don't want that. So hit Command D to deselect. And it just did what? The neck part? You don't want any selection going on right now. So just hit Command D. And then come over to your layers palette and let's make a copy of the background layer, this layer 0, Command J. I'm going to double click on that and call this channel knockout. And say OK. And then I'm going to go over to my channel knockout mask, the one that I just finished building. Hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click to load that as a selection. And then back over to my layers palette and add it as a layer mask. Now, it doesn't look like anything has changed because you've actually got a copy underneath it of the exact same thing, so you can't really tell what we've knocked out. If you turn on the eyeball on your one on the very bottom, you can see what you've actually knocked out and realize that this mask is inverted. Again, it's hiding the figure and showing the background. I want the exact opposite. So with the mask selected, and you can tell it is because it's got the little white brackets around it, hit Command I to invert it, and this is what your image will now look like. So this is the first of the knockouts. I'm also going to put a white background in between these two. So select your bottom layer. It doesn't matter whether it's turned on or off. It doesn't matter because we're going to hide it right now. We're going to add an adjustment layer to this. So the icon at the very bottom of your layers palette, the circle that's half black and half white, click on that and come up and we're going to add a solid color. A dialog box will open up. In my case, it is white already, but if you want to get it, make sure it's white. You can always hover over your foreground and background colors with the color picker open, and you'll actually get a little eyedropper tool, and you can select the white background, the white foreground or background, whichever it is. It's just a fast way to get white in there. If you can't remember that, just type in 255 for your red value, hit the tab key, 255 for your green, tab key, 255 for your blue, and say OK to that. So this is basically where the image would actually start on that, and this is the channel knockout. I've asked you also to go in and remove spill on this. We've already went over how to remove spill in the beginning, but is everybody good on this part so far? Okay, so that's one way of doing it. I'm going to make a copy of my background layer right now. So again, all the way down to the virgin at the very bottom, Command J to make a copy of it and drag it all the way to the very top. Again, when you're dragging stuff up to the top, you need to make sure that you get that blue line that's at the very top, and that will then tell you this is going to go to the top. Otherwise, this can end up jumping in between the two. You don't want it to do that. I'm going to go all the way up to the very top. So I've actually got a brand new layer that's sitting on the very top. I'm going to turn it on, and it just looks like we're starting from scratch. Everybody good on this part? So one way to make it is the channel. The next way we're going to do this is based on color range. To do color range, come up to your select menu, down to color range, and a dialog box will open up. In my case, my image is mirroring what I see in my dialog box. In your case, unless you've changed something, it won't be. So I'm going to change mine to look like yours. So as everybody gets something that looks small little thumbnail that kind of shows a little bit of your figure, and then a big and then your screen is normal. Yours is what? So if you look at your selection preview at the bottom of the color range window, click on it. It's a drop down menu. Select none. That's where we want to start. Is everybody good on that part? It doesn't matter if it's mostly black. You don't need to worry about that. You just need to be able to see your image. Okay. You, underneath the OK, cancel, load, and save, there are 3 little eyedroppers. By default, the first one is selected, and this works like all selection tools. If, for instance, you click on her skin, you will actually see it does a selection of her skin. If you click on the background, it gets rid of the selection of her skin, and it only does the background. The problem I have with this, though, is that you can't see you can't see what you can't see. This thumbnail is so small, it's really hard for me to tell. If you click on your selection preview drop-down menu and go to grayscale, not black and white, but grayscale, it will then actually, your image will reflect exactly what's going on in the background, and it's just easier to work on this. So again, I've got a lot of contamination that's on this side, on the lower left-hand side here as well, and other contamination that's around here. I've also got my fuzziness is set at 20. If you guys want to have the same experience as me, set your fuzziness slider at the very top to 20. Make sure that localized color clusters is turned off. Nobody uses that. You'll never use it either. Then I don't want to change my selection. I want to add to my selection. I want to add to the green. So what happened was I clicked on a green. It picks that green and a little bit of tone that's on either side of that green, and then that's it. If you use your fuzziness slider, it will actually expand that range that's on both sides of the color you picked. But I really need to expand the range of colors. I've got this one green that it's picked. I want to select more greens. To do that, you click on the second eyedropper that's underneath the OK, cancel, load, and save. That's got the little plus next to it. When you click on that, now you can come over to this area. I'm doing the lower left-hand side. You can come over to this area and you can click on that area, and you'll see it's now progressively adding to this area. It just picked up a whole lot more. However, you don't need to pick every single individual spot. You can click and drag. So again, you don't want to touch the figure, but I'm going to click and drag across a whole area of the background that was on that side. I'm going to come up to the top right-hand corner and do the exact same thing. I'm going to click and drag over that. And that gives me a much broader selection of the greens to pick from. And then I'm going to use my fuzziness slider. I'm going to start to crank it up to really be able to get in to eat away at the hair that I know needs to be transparent. Again, I'm worried about my edges here. So I'm temporarily holding down my spacebar and command to temporarily get the magnifying glass, and I'm zooming in to actually see what's going on in this area that's over in the area that's around her hair. I'm up to a fuzziness now of around 98, 100, somewhere in there. I'm going to then use, for me, I'm going to say, this works for me. I'm going to accept this as my image. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. It now gives me a selection. I want to save this selection so that I've got another channel that I can work on. So to do that, up to the select menu, down to save selection, and we are going to name this color range knockout. And say OK to that. Command D to deselect, and now if you go to the bottom of your screen on the channels palette, on the very bottom, at the very bottom, you'll have another new channel down there called Color Range Knockout. Now, this Color Range Knockout is similar to the one above it in that it's masking out the figure and showing the background. Well, I want the opposite of that. So I'm going to select the color channel. I've just built this Color Range Knockout color channel. So select it. My image is now revealing what I'm just looking at here. Hit Command I to invert it, and this is now the correct version of my mask. I'm going to hover over the thumbnail, Command click to load that as a selection, and then come over to my layers palette on the top layer. It's called layer 0 copy. I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call it color range knockout. And then I'm going to add the selection that I've got going as a layer mask. And then I'm going to also turn off the channel knockout that's visible right underneath it. And this is now the knockout that I've actually made using the color range tool. And for my money, this is actually better off where we're starting out at this point right here. It looks better to me than the channel knockout. Again, I would have to go in and probably pen tool the edges to get, to clean up. If you zoom in and take a look, especially at her lower cheek, it's pretty janky down in there. All the tools that you know how to use, either overlay brush in there or the pen tool to actually tweak that out. Is everybody good on this part? At this point, you should save your work because again, this is your homework. Okay, so I've got the third and final way to do this, and you should know this really quickly. So there is a very sophisticated program designed to knock out green screens. It's called Primat. I've owned it for years. So if you want to spend $500 on this dedicated program to do that, you can actually spend that money to do it. But the knockouts that you'll ultimately get from it are inferior to what I'm going to show you in Photoshop right now. So the one that I'm going to show you in Photoshop right now comes from a Photoshop guru guy that I became aware of 30 years ago in New York. I've never seen this anywhere else, but it's actually brilliant in how it works. So I'm going to show you that method. It's the one that I use for everything. Anyway, keep that in mind. The second thing is that how many people in this room are using actions in Photoshop? Okay, so you're also going to learn how to build an action right now. So what actions are in Photoshop are things that you do repeatedly over and over and over and over again, especially long involved things. So you can have actions that will do pretty much anything in Photoshop. They're very easy to build. So we are going to do this, and you'll see why we're building this as an action. You're gonna be able to leverage this for the whole rest of the semester here in this class. And as long as you've got these actions saved to your own computer and loaded, they will actually work for you for the rest of your life. So that's what we're going to do here. So I am going to make another brand new selection. So I'm going to go down to make another copy of your virgin background layer. Command J, drag it all the way up to the top. Let go. I'm going to double click on the name here, and I'm going to rename this Zero Selective Color, or Zero SEL Knockout, because that's what this is going to be. It's going to be a zero selective color on this. So to build an action, it starts with the actions palette. So we don't have anything selected right now. Start over on your actions palette. So it's right next to, it's a tab right next to your history palette. Just click on the action palette. It'll actually come to the front. Now in your case, you probably only have one set. You can do sets for your actions. So a lot of people, for instance, will have actions that are only designed to do color work, and actions that are only designed to do knockout work, and actions that are only designed to do perspective work. And so they'll build giant sets of these. To actually add a set, it's just the icon at the very bottom of the actions palette that looks like a folder. Again, we're not going to change this. We're going to actually build this action and put it in your default actions. But if you look at my actions palette, this will throw you off because I've got lots of sets and I've got lots of different actions that are in here. You're not going to have any of this stuff until you start building and using actions. So we're just going to build this and put it into your default action set. To do that, to build this action, come over to the menu that's on the right-hand side of the tab, click on it, and you'll get a flyout menu, and up at the very top you have the word that says, or an menu option that says New Action. Click on that. And then you want to rename this, and I'm going to call it Zero Selective Color, or Zero SEL Color. Zerosel, color. And then again, if you had multiple sets, you can see these are my multiple sets right here. You could actually put this into a different set, but in your case, you shouldn't have anything except for a set of default actions. So go ahead and leave it in the default action group. You can assign function keys and color tags to all of this kind of stuff. Just at this stage of the game, you don't need to do any of that. Just leave it as it is right now and click on the record button. So what Photoshop now is going to do is it's just going to watch everything that you do, and it's going to record every step that you make into an action. And so then when you replay that action, it's just going to replace to replay all the movements and the things that you actually did. So to start with this, make sure that your top layer is the one that is selected. Mine is. You want to come over, we're going to add an adjustment layer here to begin with. So come over to your adjustment layer icon at the very bottom of the layers palette, the circle that's half black and half white. Click on the flyout menu, and the first thing we're going to do is add a hue saturation curve. So just do hue saturation, that's all you need to do. We're going to then go back and we're going to add another adjustment layer on top of this. So again, I'm going to click on adjustment layers. And in this one, we want to do one that you'll find at the very bottom of it, and it's the one that's called selective color. That's where it gets its name. When you get to the selective color part, if you take a look at your properties panel up at the top, this is the selective color part here. This is one of the oldest controls that actually happens in Photoshop. And what this is designed to do, this is for people who are actually working on a CMYK press at the time they're trying to proof an image. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to go in and control the amount of CMYK that make up any color. If you click on the drop-down menu here, you'll see you have reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, magentas, whites, neutrals, and blacks. So what this tool was designed to do was to be able to go in and say, we've got too much cyan in our reds. I just want to pull some cyan out of the reds, and it gave you that control. That is not what we are going to do with this tool. This tool, we're going to actually use it to try to build a better mask for us to start with. So to use this, you want to make sure reds by default in your little drop-down menu will be selected. The only thing we are moving in this is the black slider. It's the black ink slider that's at the bottom. You want to click on that and drag it all the way to the right. That gives you a plus 100%. And you'll also notice now her skin just got a little bit dirty. What we just told Photoshop to do was take anything that you consider to be red in here and fill it with black ink. Make sense? We're going to do that for every single color and every single tone. So come down to the yellows, grab the black slider only, drag it all the way to the right. Down to the greens, black slider only, all the way to the right. Down to the cyans, black slider, all the way to the right. Down to the blues, black slider, all the way to the right. Down to the magentas, black slider, all the way to the right. Down to the whites, black slider all the way to the right. Down to the neutrals, black slider all the way to the right. And then finally the blacks, black slider all the way to the right. And yes?
Next to your hue saturation, you don't only put on hue saturation, you put on, you don't leave that just as it is. And now you're going to add another adjustment layer, and it's at the bottom, so it goes down the side color. And then black slider all the way to the right for all of them.
Okay, so you should have an image that looks one of two ways. It's either black like mine is, or it looks solarized. Does anybody have the solarized version? If you have the solarized version, it's the radio button at the bottom. Yours is set to relative. You need to change it to absolute, and you will get this black image. Did that work for everybody? So what I've just said to Photoshop that I want it to do is I want you to take every single color and every single tone. So the whites, midtones, and blacks are the whites, neutrals, and black. Those actually should be renamed. Again, but this is a really old tool. They should be renamed highlights, midtones, and shadows. But they are what they are, right? So now everybody got a black image, right? So now come back over to your actions palette, and if you look down at the very bottom of it now, it's changed. This is the screen where you actually can control things, and you'll notice that there's a little red dot there. That's telling you you're recording right now. But right next to it is a little white square. If you click on that white square, it actually stops the recording. And hopefully this action has worked. So to see if it has worked, throw away your selective color layer, throw away your hue saturation layer, select the very top layer, because again, I want this action to be on the very top of this, and then come over and look at your actions palette, and you should see inside of here an action that says 0 selective color. Now, if the check mark is actually open, or the little triangle that's actually pointing down, you'll actually see all the steps that you just recorded inside that. You do not want to pick one of the steps, because you can actually start an action in the middle of it and you'll miss the first part of it. Most, if not every action you'll ever make, you want to launch it from the actual root. So, and that is the word 0 selective color. So if you select the topmost part where it says 0 selective color, and then come down, there's a little arrow at the bottom of your actions palette. That's the arrow that indicates you use to say to Photoshop, play this action. And if you click on it, you should get both of those same hue, saturation, and selective color should be on your screen, and all of those colors should be black, and your image should be black. But one of these bugs in Photoshop, and I think it's because the selective color tool is so old, it can actually flip you from absolute to relative. Simply click on absolute and you'll have the black image. So has everybody got this part? Are we good on this part? Anybody not have this? So then go back to your drop-down menu and come up to the greens and actually drag your black slider from all the way to the right, all the way to the left. And what you end up here, what is ending up happening in here is that you're saying to Photoshop, okay, I want you to take all of the greens in this image and I want you to then fill them with the opposite. In this case, the opposite is white ink. And you can see that your background should be getting lighter, not as light as I would like it to do, which is telling me that the green in the background here is not that pure. So everybody's got something. Some of you guys look like you have a little bit better version of it than I have on mine. So anyway, we'll find out. So we need to then make the green a purer green for this to actually work better. How do I make the green more pure? Exactly, hue saturation. So if you go back to your hue saturation layer that's underneath this, I'm going to use the targeting adjustment tool because I know where there's green. There's green on the lower right-hand corner of this. I'm going to grab the targeting adjustment tool. It's the hand that's got the little finger, the arrows pointing to the right or the left. If you hover over your image, even though your image looks black and white to us, that's all being caused by the selective color layer, which is on top of your hue saturation. I've got the hue saturation active. Photoshop still knows that these colors underneath it, it knows exactly what they are. I'm going to click down in this sort of like lower right hand corner. I'm going to click and drag to the right, and when you do that, it actually will start to amp up your color. It starts to saturate your color more, and in my case I'm not showing this because I don't have my layer turned on. That would actually help, so let me let me do that again. So this is where I started with my image. Again, I had my my image turned off so that you couldn't really see any part of my image at all. So this is what your image should look like. I'm feeling like I've fucked all of this up. I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to throw away these two layers. And I'm going to run my action again. This time I'm going to do it with my actual image showing. So again, 0 selective color. Click on it. It runs the action. My image looks very solarized. Click on absolute. I've now got the completely black image. In my drop-down menu, I'm going to go to the greens. I'm going to grab the black slider, and instead of saying I want you to fill this with black ink, I'm going to go the complete opposite, which is hard for people to get their heads around, but what we're saying is we want you to fill this now with white ink. White ink exists in Photoshop because it's strictly mathematical. So I'm going to drag it all the way to the other side, and you can see this is the beginnings of a really good mask right here. Much better than I had when I picked channels, and much better than I picked with color range. But I want it to be even better in here. And again, the issue is that the green that's in this image is not technically a pure green in the way Photoshop would define pure green. So select your hue saturation layer to make it active. Grab the targeting adjustment tool, the hand that's got the arrow that points both ways. Click on the background. If you drag to the right, you saturate the color and the background becomes lighter. If it's not, if you go the opposite direction, you actually get rid of the saturation. That is no longer green, so the image goes black again because my selective color was designed to only put white into green. Well, this is no longer green. This is actually now gray in the background because I completely desaturated it. But, so again, I'm going to go back into here, select it so you can see it happen in real time, drag it back, it makes the green nuclear, and that's why I get a much, much, much more effective version of this. Does this make sense to everybody, what's going on here? Look at the quality of this to begin with. Don't you wish you had this when you were doing Sunny? Right? I mean, this is, you run the action, you pull the slider on the green to, or whatever you're doing to one direction, whatever, and boom, you are there. And it's quality. Look at the edges of that hair that's in there, all the whole 9 yards. If you take a look over in your channels palette now, you could think you would be able to copy the RGB channel at the very top. You can't. If you actually grab that and try to drag it down on top of the little square with the plus in the middle at the bottom of the channels palette, you'll get the circle with a slash through it. That's because the RGB is not a true channel. It's an illusion. It's just a favor so that you can see what the composite is. The only real ones that are in here are the RGB channels and then the alpha ones that we've been working on. But you can grab either the red one, the green one, or the blue one. It doesn't matter. This image is now black and white, so they are all identical, and simply drag one of them down to that little square and then double click on it, and we are going to call this Zero Select Knockout. So then at this stage of the game, we're just going to take a look at what this one looks like. Again, there's cleanup work that you're going to have to do. I look at most of this stuff, and most of this is actually overlay brush, so we'll do a little bit of that really fast. So the B key to get an overlay brush, to get a brush, turn on my Zero Select Knockout. I'm going to come up to the top. I'm going to make this a medium hard brush. Get that dropout to go down. I'm going to change the blending mode down to overlay, 100% opacity, 100% flow. And then again, in these areas that are light, stay away from the hair, but these areas that are in here, I just started to paint and I'm actually getting a darker color in here. I don't want that. It's just because my foreground color is the wrong color. Command Z to undo it, hit the X key to make white my foreground color, and then I can come in and actually take care of all of this. And I would just go ahead and refine my mask and continue to do all the part, pretty much like we've done in the past. The other thing that you can do, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. The other thing that you can do here is we can run levels on this still. This is a good beginning for a mask, but I've got a lot of contamination here in the background. So I am going to put down color sampler points. I'm going to change the ones that I've got. I've got a number 1 point that's still there, and you can see up here in the menu part, I'm getting a weird readout in here. And the reason I'm getting this weird readout of my numbers up in here, because again, I'm working in black and white, and this has actually got equal values for my red and green, but not for my blue, and then these really bizarre ones that are happening over here. That can't happen in a normal image. However, if you look at it, it's doing that because you've got the hue saturation as the layer that's active. If you click on the zero selective color underneath it, and then take a look at these, you'll actually see that the numbers are much closer to where they should be. And then again, I want to move this color sampler point from the 2 right here. I want to bring it down into this area where I've got a lot of contamination. So if I hover over it, nothing happens. But if you hold down the shift key, you used to be able to temporarily get that to actually click on that guy and move it. But that's not going to happen. So in this case, I'm going to go back to my color sampler tool. I'm going to hover over my point number 2, and I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to bring it down here into the area where I've got a lot of that contamination that's down in here. But the problem I have now is that this is now, the contamination is really pebbly. I'm getting some areas are darker, some areas are lighter. I don't know if I'm on a lighter area or a darker area right now. So in this case, I'm actually going to bump my average. The sample size, I'm going to take it up to a 11 by 11. And it'll give me a much better, I know I'll be encapsulating all of that other stuff in here. And then again, click on your 0 selective color knockout channel that's in the very bottom of your channels palette, the one we just made. And I'm going to look at my after number readouts right here, and I'm just going to run levels like we run levels on any normal channel. Command L. Again, my 1 is actually almost there, so my black point is already selected. I'm just going to tap the arrow key once, and I go to 0. Then I'm going to grab my white point slider and pull it back till I get my after readouts over here, close to 255, but not quite there. Then I'm going to go to my arrow keys and tap this in till I just get to 255. Then this can happen. I'm just going to continue to drag. You start to eat into all the hair. You fuck it all up. Again, you want to do this. The reason I keep telling you to do this the way I keep telling you is you want to get minimal change in levels to try to maintain the transparency that you've got working for you in that mask. And recheck your point number 1, make sure it's still good, and go ahead and say okay to that. And if you take a look now, that actually cleaned up a ton of the background right here. I've still got contamination on the side, on the left side in the lower part. I would probably fix that using the pen tool to clean all that up. And you've also got, if you zoom in, if you can see, there's catch lights that are in her eyes that still need to be fixed. There's also contamination in the hair on this left side over here. All of that would need to be overlay brushed to black. The right side is actually really pretty good in here. So this thing is almost ready to rock. And so let's just see how good a mask it is. So again, I'm going to command click to load this as a selection. I'm going to go back over to my layer that is the 0 selective color, and I'm going to add that layer mask. And then again, this layer mask is completely inverted, so I'm going to turn off everybody that's underneath this guy. I'm going to invert my layer mask by hitting Command I. Again, all the stuff that we've done before. And then what else is going on in here? Oh, turn off both those selective masks and your hue saturation layers. As a matter of fact, you can throw those away. They've done their job. And so this is where I would be starting. So in a really quick, look at the quality of this already. There's not much more in here that you need to clean up except the lower half of her face and the spill. And we did that to run that action and then run levels on that. We've done no brush work. We've done no hand work in this thing at all. And then contrast that back to the beginning when we did the mask that was based on the green channel and how much hand work that took. Game changer. Yes. That was it. I applied the layer mask. All right, so you've done levels. Did it get all clean? The white background is all cleaned out? Yeah, okay, keep going. So then scroll up to the very top of your layers palette. You can turn these two guys off. You don't need to see actually go away. So click on this one. Hold down your shift key and click on the next one. And then shift key. So it's this one. So it's active now. That's great. The reason this is red right now is because it's eyeball on. This is turning eyeball off. But hold on the command key and click on this to load this selection. And then over here, add it as a layer mask. Perfect. And then it needs to be inverted.
and then turn off the one that's underneath it. And that's it.
But I mean, look at the quality of this, guys. This is insane. So I just, yes. So do you have your white layer turned on? Do you have anything turned on between the white layer and the one you just built? Turn all of them off except for the very top one that you're working on. You're moving a lot around over there too, so hang on. Yeah, so you don't have that mask on here yet. You need to load it and put it on there. So go to your normal palette. Yeah, you want to go from there. Go to selectors. And selected. Perfect. You have some good mask on. Questions about this? All right, so for your homework, you need to finish refining any of these that need to be finished refining. Don't spend tons of hours on it because this last one is really the best one. That was the whole point in showing you this. Go ahead and remove the spell from the best one, turn it in, and you guys will get a really good grade on this one. Make sense? I want to show you one other thing first really quickly. I threw away my selective color. I threw away both of those layers. So I'm just going to run my action one more time. Again, I'm going to put on absolute. So this takes me back to the whole black thing again, which is fine, exactly what I want. But what I wanted to show you is this. This is not just for selecting greens. Click on the drop-down menu and come down to whites and pull your white slider all the way over. What is this? This is a highlight mask. If you were to load this, look at what would actually be impacted here. This part of her face, which is considered highlights, you would be able to work on. Her hair, all the shadow areas here would be protected. Her eyes would be protected, except for the whites of her eyes. The background would be open to actually have something to go. So again, I can come over to my red, green, or blue. It doesn't matter which one, because this is a black and white image now. They are identical. So just make a copy of your red channel, and we'll call this highlights. Then go back to your properties panel, because we've already saved this now. Take your whites and actually drag it all the way back so that the whites go all the way back to the other side, so that this is completely black. Hang on one second. My image is black again. Go down to your blacks now and drag that black slider all the way to the left. What is this? This is a shadow mask. If you use this mask, you can control what's happening in the shadows. All of your midtones and your highlights are protected. The only thing that's showing here are the darkest parts of your image. So again, I can make a copy of the red here and actually call this a shadow mask. Go back up to the top, select the whole RGB again, grab your slider, your back slider, and drag it all the way in the middle. Go into the middle range right now, your neutrals, and drag it all the way back. What is this? This is a midtone mask, right? My highlights are being protected. That's the dark area, this area that's up in here. These are the highlights. They're being protected. The background is white. It's the ultimate highlight. But then my shadows are also being protected here. So I could save this as a midtone mask. And again, if I were to use this to run it, it would only impact my midtones. Does that make sense? So last one, drag that back if you've actually done that. Go to your whites and drag the black slider all the way to the left. And then also go to your blacks and do the same thing. What is this? This is a highlight shadow mask that allows you to impact both the highlights and the shadows, but it protects your midtones. So this tool can do a whole lot more than just knock out green screen. To find out how well this worked, go ahead and throw all your selective color, all those, they've done their job. We don't need those guys anymore. I'm actually going to come over here though, and I'm going to load my shadow mask. I'm just going to hover over the thumbnail of shadow mask, command click to load this as a selection, and then I'm going to add a hue saturation layer on top of this. So up to hue saturation. And you'll see that it builds the hue saturation layer with this mask on it. And if you hold down the Option key and look at it, you can see the only areas that are going to be impacted by whatever I do with this adjustment layer are going to be the hair is going to be impacted the greatest. The shadow side of her face will also be impacted. The center of her eyes are going to be very impacted here, but the rest of her face is going to be protected. That's not going to, nothing is going to happen in there. Click on the properties part of that layer again to see what this really means, and let's actually just shift the hue. So I'm actually going to take the hue at the very top and I'm going to push it over, and you can see that has now pumped a ton of red into the shadows, but it hasn't affected the highlights at all. Her skin tone didn't change. The area over in here in the shadow did, but this part didn't. You can actually drag the hue saturation slider to the other side, and you'll actually see you're pumping yellow and red into those now. I'm going to double click on this to zero it back out. If you want to see a more extreme version of this, click on colorize, and now you can really crank with this. And actually I'm going to take it into the blue range. I'm also going to pop my saturation on this, and you can see this is a luminosity mask that was based strictly on the luminosity of the image, and it is controlling what ends up being impacted by this. I'm only making the blues in the shadows, I've only amped up the blues in the shadows. Now, a classic color grading that happens in film, in a lot of photography, a lot of fashion, beauty, whatever, is this coloring will actually happen for the shadows. But I have a highlight mask here as well. I'm going to come over and command click to load my highlight mask. I'm going to come back over to my layers palette. I'm going to add a second hue saturation layer here. I'm going to also click on colorize, and then I'm going to grab my coloring and drag it into the yellow range here and also saturate this up. And now you've got that classic blue shadow, purple shadow, yellow highlight that you see to fucking death in every fuck. Hollywood grades this shit the same every single time. Actually, the shadow parts here, they put a lot of green in those as well, so we can go back to that part and actually shift it more into the green part of it. And this is grading in every fucking film that's come out of Hollywood in the last 10 years. I'm so sick of seeing this color grading I could throw up, but this is how you do it. Are questions about this? Alrighty. Save this. You do not need to have done the colorizing work here. I just wanted you guys to realize that this zero selective color selection works for a whole range of things. It works for any color. So if you have a red background, it'll work for the red background. You would do the red. You would change the black ink for the red red drop-down menu part of the properties panel instead of the green one. You can see we've already changed here. We weren't using the green ones. We were using the highlights and the blacks. So anyway, any questions about this? Are we good? All right, hit the F key, save your work once to get to the black pasteboard. F key again. You can close this guy up. You don't need to save this. Okay, I am not going to do, I got back to you guys about the pen tool. I'm going to avoid looking at our pen tool work this week because there's other stuff that I want to get across to you this week that you're going to need for your homework. We will look at any feedback that I have on the pen tool stuff next week. That's where we'll start out with. Everybody okay with that part? Okay. So the retouching tools, really quickly. Let's go into session 6 of our class files. And inside that, if you actually take a look inside your folder for session 6, there is a clone and healing 1 PSD. If you could open that one up for me really quickly, that would be great. Again, I'm going to double click on the hand to get this to open up. If you take a look at what we've got here in the image, you will see that there's actually a layer that's got a part of a circle on it, and then there's a gradient. The background layer has got a gradient in it, and it's also got a solid color. These are both synthetic files. I just made them in Photoshop. So this is a gradient that's going from black to white, and this whole left side here is just a middle gray. That's all it is. So everybody's got this open, right? Okay. So most of you are familiar with the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool. Is there anybody in this room who doesn't have any idea what those are? All right, that's a good sign. Now, any idea what the difference in them is? Yeah, nobody knows that either, right? This part matters. Which tool do you use to do which thing? Sort of makes sense? So we're going to start with the clone stamp tool. It's the S key. If you can't remember that, if you look over on your history, on your tool palette, it's the one that looks like a stamp. It's supposed to be a thing with a little handle on it, like a bank stamp, whatever. If you click on that flyout menu, you'll see you have clone stamp or pattern stamp. You want to make sure that you do have the clone stamp tool. The clone stamp tool is a brush, so the minute you do that, your options palette will change, and if you go up to the very top here and take a look at it in your drop-down menu, you can control the hardness of this, you can control the size of it here. You've also got blending modes, opacity, and flow. All of those things we've actually got going for us right here, and that part's great. I'm going to put my hardness at a 50%. That is the default for Photoshop for the clone stamp tool. That doesn't mean we're going to keep it there all the time, but that's basically what we have going on here. You'll also notice that as you go across the options palette, there is a box with a right next to the word that says aligned. And then there's also a sample thing that says current, and if you click on the current and you go look at it in a drop down, you can either do your current layer, you can do the current layer and below, or you can do all layers here. In our case, for the part that we're going to work on here in the beginning, we're just going to leave it on the current layer. Then I'm going to cover over onto my image. I'm going to come over onto the gradient part, and I'm going to make my brush bigger. And by default, is your align checked or unchecked? Right, so I'm going to go ahead and check mine. That is the default of Photoshop. So the way the tool works is that with the clone stamp tool, you pick the source of what you want to use to replace then a destination. So what I want to do is I want to put some of this gradient here in this mid-tone, middle gray field here. So I start in the source. This is what I'm going to pick to do the replacement. Hold down your option key and you will again get that little color sampler point slider. Click on that. That sets the source. And then when you come over onto your gradient, you will actually see kind of a preview of what's supposed to happen. It's sort of a ghosted out part. Does everybody have this? It's because you're on a layer that's too long. Yeah, make sure, you guys, that you got the underlayer selected, not the one that's got the half line on it. Because if you're trying to clone something that's with the eyeball turned off, you can't do it because the eyeball because it doesn't. The layer is invisible to Photoshop. It can't see it. So anyway, I set my sample here in the gradient part. I'm going to come over into this side and I'm simply going to click and I'm going to drag down. And you can see that indeed it did exactly what it said it was going to do. It gives me sort of a softish edge because I'm at 50% hardness. And it actually copied the gradient and it actually put it over here into this space. However, if I come over here, I'm not going to start at the very top again. I'm actually going to start on the left-hand side in the middle. And I'm going to simply click and drag down there. And what you'll notice is that Photoshop has kept the relationship between source and background, so I haven't changed. If I continue to do this, ultimately, if I were to do this entire frame here, it would end up matching the very first one exactly. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? So when you think about clone, what you're thinking about is that it is a direct replacement. It is you're taking your source and you were using those pixels to replace the pixels of your destination, and it is a complete thing. However, one of the problems that we do have when I just said it's a complete thing, it's not entirely complete. In the center part right here, it is complete, but as you get out to the edges out here, you start getting into transparency. And the biggest problem we have with doing retouching with clone stamp and healing brush both is that these areas that are on the edge that are transparent, that are what make your retouching seem invisible, you get away with it, right? But think about what you're really doing. On those areas that are transparent, You are fading out the replacement, and the old original one is coming through. And the truth of it is, somewhere along this line, right here, sort of in the middle, you've got half of your old shit and half of your new shit mixed together. If you do that to skin, you will destroy the texture of the skin. There's no way to get around it. You're mixing old texture with new texture. This is not the tool to be doing it with the way most people have been taught to do it. I'm going to show you ways to do it that will actually work, but it involves a whole lot more than just going in here and whacking the shit out of this. So that brings up a point, though, and it's a point that I want to stress right now here at the beginning as we're getting into retouching. So I come to you, I'm a student, and I come to you and I say, I've got 10 fashion images and $100. I want you to retouch all the faces. Full-length fashion. Would you say yes or no? $100. Why not? Why not? Open up an image, open up another image, another image. I can knock out the faces and that. I'll blast the shit out of it. They'll be like fake faces, like you see, plastic face. I don't care. I'm giving you what you're paying me for. I spend 10 minutes doing it. You give me $100 and I got 10 minutes. Now would you do it? If I said a minute an image, I'll give you $100 a minute an image. Yeah, but it's gonna be really shitty retouching, right? You get what you pay for. Great lesson, right? But then instead, you've got L'Oreal comes to you and says, I've got these images of Julia Roberts. I'll give you $20,000 to retouch one. Are you going to do the same thing? Are you going to go in there with a big old clone stamp tool, whack the shit out of it in 10 minutes and hand it back to them? No. You won't get paid and you'll never work for them again. And all the work that you took to actually get into that door is worthless, right? So there are extremes that we have in retouching, and you need to figure out either the extremes or where in the middle you land for the retouching that you're going to do for the reason that you're going to do it. For me, from the beauty work that I do for my portfolio, I do $20,000 a pop retouching. For me, for my wife's Instagram account, full-length fashion, way in the background, whatever, I go in there and I bang the shit out of it with a healing brush tool, and I don't think twice about it. I send it to her, she loves it, puts it up in her Instagram account, it lasts for a day. Who cares? You need to keep that in mind, okay? And you need to then think, okay, is this worth doing this? And then if it is, you should do it. And if it isn't, you shouldn't. Are we good on that part? Okay, because we're going to hit both extremes today. So this works pretty well, but again, not the best tool to use for this. I'm going to undo all of this. You can either go back in history to when this opened, or you can do Command Option Z or Command Z, depending on how you have your other parts set up. I'm going to now change this. Again, I'm going to work on my background layer. I'm going to change this. I'm going to turn off the aligned part, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to start at the very top of my gradient, hold down the Option key to set my source point, come over to my to the gray area. I'm going to click and drag down, and the very same thing happens that we just thought was going to happen. But now look what happens when I go to the midpoint here. I'm going to start at the midpoint here, and I'm going to click and go down. And you'll see that Photoshop has gone back to the original source point. And no matter where I start these new lines in here, no matter where this starts, up here at the top, down here at the bottom, it always goes back to the original point. Now there's reasons that we use this, because you can think about it like this. If you're trying to clone texture of skin, and you can actually find an area of skin that's got really good texture, you can use this trick to keep going back to that same point to grab that good texture all along. Whereas if you have it done where it's aligned, as you start doing your cloning, you start going into different areas and it may not have the texture that you want. Make sense? It's the align check mark right here. So again, I'm going to hold down Command Option and hit the letter Z to go back in time. Did that make sense to everybody what we just did? Okay. You can control what you really see when you're actually using this tool. If you come up to your window palette and you come down to Clone Source, a dialog will actually open up, a palette will open up that allows you to control what you really see. Mine was actually different than your all's. I actually have mine set to the opacity of my overlay. So the overlay here is this. I'm going to crank my opacity all the way back up again. Again, I'm going to hold down my sample to click a new one. And then when I come over here, I get a perfect, so I was going to clone black onto this. It's now black. As I start to work my way down here, I'll go ahead and do the clone right here. it starts to get to be white. Again, this is not aligned here, so it goes back to showing me black at the bottom because that's what it would actually be. You can control that right here. You can turn off your overlay. So if you click on your overlay to turn this off, all you get is the circle. And the reason you want to have this at times is that sometimes it's really important that you see what your destination is. What are you really trying to cover with a new source? And if you've got this turned on, there's sometimes where the minute you put your brush over the destination, you obscure it and you can't see it anymore. So you can completely turn it off by doing this, or you can leave this on and do like a 50% here. And in this case, you'll actually see part of your source and then part of your destination so that you can really line this stuff up and make it work. Does that sort of make sense? Are we good on this part? Alrighty. I don't need my clone sort. Well, I'll leave it out here for the time being, but we'll see what happens in just a second. So, actually, I got to get back. I'm going to get rid of this for just a second. The healing brush tool. The shortcut for that is the letter J. When you click on that one, though, you've got a lot of healing brush tools. So if you click on your drop-down menu and you get this flyout, you will actually see a couple of new tools as well as a couple of old ones. You've got the spot healing brush tool is the one at the very top. The remove tool is a new one that uses AI. The healing brush tool is the original, it goes way back. And then the patch tool, content aware move tool, and the red eye tool. The tools that we are going to be using are either the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool. The only difference in these two is with the spot healing brush, Adobe picks the source for you. You don't get to pick it. And then the healing brush tool, you do pick the source. So I'm going to actually ask you to pick that one first. So grab the healing brush tool. Again, it is a brush, so if you go up to your options palette, click on your drop-down menu. I'm going to also leave this at a 50% hardness, a blending mode of normal, and here you'll see that you don't get a flow and you don't get an opacity. However, you do have the align, that still is a part here, and then you don't need to worry about the legacy part of this right now, but you also still have that drop-down menu where you can work on the current layer, the current and below, or all layers. So I'm going to make sure I've got my background part selected right here. I'm going to make my brush larger. I'm going to do the very same trick I did before. I'm going to click on this to set my source point in the dark part here, and then I'm going to come over here and drag down, but I'm going to ask everybody in this room before you do that, what's going to happen to my destination? Is this going to work the same way that the clone stamp tool worked? So what's the difference? No. So this is what happens. The clone stamp tool is pretty obvious. The clone stamp tool takes the source and completely replaces the destination with it, and that's just it, right? The edges will mix it together. It has all those controls, whatever, but that's pretty much it, cut and dry. What the healing brush tool does is this, and it's 2 steps, and it's not only healing brush, it's the whole healing brush group. Spot healing brush works this way. The patch tool works this way. So this is what's happening. It's taking the texture of what you have in your source and it's replacing the texture in your destination. That's the first step. But the second step, so in that case it would be similar, not exactly the same, but similar to the clone stamp. The second step is that it then looks at the color and tone around that new texture and it tries to blend it in. So this is what's going to happen. Check this out. And you can do this with me. I'm going to come over and hold down my option key to set my source point. I'm going to come over for my destination. I'm going to click and drag down and let go. And I have nothing. Nothing changed. Is that true? Did that tool not work? No, it did work. These are both synthetic files. I have no texture in either side. So the texture that I replaced was no texture. But then the second step, it looked at the surrounding area, which is nothing but middle gray, and it replaced all the things that I changed with middle gray. And so I end up at the same place that I started from. Does that make sense to everyone? Are we good on this part? Okay. You can close this up, and the next thing we open is going to be your homework. More homework. I shouldn't have said it that way, should I? Anyway, it's actually inside of your assignment folder, and it's called Skin As Retouch. If you guys can open that up for me. So this is going to be your homework, and I'm going to now show you how you do the Julia Roberts $20,000 retouching. Aren't you happy about that? First thing, I want to show you one thing here really quickly. I think we've already looked at this in this class, but I want to make sure everybody is on the same page and understands this. Is this got any dimension to it, or is this just flat? Wow, you guys are so skeptical of me right now. This is ridiculous. It's a fucking flat white or gray like circle. It's as flat as it could be, right? Okay. Whew. Has this got dimension? It does. Again, it's a flat screen. I realize that, but it does have the illusion of dimension. It does. Why? What's the difference in these two? It's both. It's shadow and highlights. So shadows and highlights are what give dimension. So just as a complete aside for all the people in here who shoot beauty, I can't believe the number of you who come in with a light and you cross-light your beauty. It actually puts a highlight and a shadow on every single pimple, pore, every fucking flaw that's in the face. You highlight it all, right? A flat light that's in the front on the axis of your camera suppresses that. Doesn't kill it completely, but so if you're going to do the cross-lighting, you should know that's fine, but you are in for a world of retouching, a world of hurt. If you want to minimize that and start at, make it as easy for you as you can, basically a flat light that's coming on in the very front or over the axis of your camera. Does that make sense? It's just something to keep in mind. Your lighting has an impact on this stuff, but our retouching does as well. So I'm going to close this guy up, and I want everybody to zoom in to the pimple that is on this girl's chin. So I've zoomed in to 300% on this, on my screen, whatever. On yours it might be a little bit different, but probably close to here. You don't want to zoom in so tight. You don't want to do this. If you continue to zoom in on this, what that does is it just makes the pimple bigger, which means the area that I need to retouch is larger. So I'm going to have to deal with it more because I've come in. So there's a happy balance that you want to strike in all of this. So I'm going to zip mine back out again to around 300. But here's one of the tricks about doing this kind of work here. So if I wanted to get rid of this pimple, again, most of you would actually go in here and either you would clone stamp this thing out or you would healing brush this stuff out. But again, the problem that we have with this, and it's the thing that you've got to remember, if you were to clone stamp this and not try to impact any other texture on here, you would have to use a completely hard clone stamp brush and you would see that line. If you healing brush this guy, it does the same thing in a certain way. And what ends up happening is that all of those tools, no matter what you're doing, all of them end up mixing old texture with new texture. And when you do that, you destroy the integrity of the skin. The skin no longer maintains, it's not the old texture, it's not the new texture, it's a blend of both of them together. And that's simply not real. And you can spot that a mile away. And so most people, when they do this work, they panic, and then they just start to really retouch the shit out of this, and that's how you end up with plastic skin. You can go to Jewel and go into the makeup section at Jewel, and you can see hundreds of examples of the most unreal alien skin in the world, because nobody has skin like that. Skin is supposed to have texture to it, but you want that texture to be pleasing. You want it to be real. You don't want it to be, again, we would need to get rid of the pimple. That's one of the textures that we're going to actually want to get rid of here, right? So I don't want to use the healing brush tool. I don't want to use the clone stamp tool. How do I get rid of this thing? Given what we have just talked about, is it possible that I could dodge and burn the pimple to the point that it disappears? Yes, I can. If I make the center of it, which is really light, darker, and the outside of it lighter because it's dark, I can actually, if I can get it to match the colors of the surrounding area, the pimple's gone and I haven't done anything to the texture. The texture's still going to be underneath it all. I'm just going to do this dodging and burning. This is where the $2,000 retouching comes in. So this is tonal retouching. That's what it's called. It is incredibly labor intensive. This will take you hours to actually do this. I'm just throwing that out here right now. But the skills that you will learn in doing this really will elevate you to the kind of If retouching has got any sort of possibility in your future as either a profession or for yourself, for your own work, your own beauty stuff, I tonal retouch all of my portfolio that's for beauty. I don't, for me, for things that are more full length, mid length, fashion, that kind of stuff, whatever, I won't, I'll tonal retouch parts of it, but nothing like I would do with this. Make sense? Okay, so how do we do this? How do you guys dodge and burn? I'm sorry? Yeah, so you do soft light layers is what most people would call it. The advantage of doing a soft light layer is that you can do dodging and burning all on one layer. So some people will do that. That's what we're actually going to use doing this, so I'm not going to explain it right now because we're going to do that. Other people will actually go in and they'll put a curve on their image and make it lighter with a mask on it, and then a curve on it to make your image darker with a mask on it, and then they'll just paint on the mask to make areas darker and lighter. Does that all make sense? So, but for me, I want to be able to manage this fast. I don't like the idea of having to go back and forth between layers. I don't want to do all of that. I want to do all this work on a single layer. And so that's how I'm going to do this part. This is also why I told you you cannot do this kind of retouching without without a tablet. You simply can't do it, and you're going to find out why right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a soft light layer on here to dodge and burn this. However, my first move in this, in all retouching, is to do a copy of this background layer. So just make sure the layer is selected, Command J to make a copy of it. And I'm going to double click on that and I'm going to rename it Pixel Retouch. Because that's what it is. Now, I'm going to throw this out to you guys right now. If you have something to write this down with, you should write this down right now. But we are going to revisit this over and over, but I'm going to give everybody time to grab a piece of paper to write this down with. Or you can listen to the video and you can copy off of this. The layer order that we do this in is really, really important. So our layer ordering for retouching, and this is going to be true for all the retouching that we do, and it starts with your pixel work first. So what is pixel work? Well, pixel work would be where you go in and you actually do a clone stamp tool, healing brush tool, because we've got some of that we're going to have to do in here. All of that happens first. Then on top of that, you do your tonal retouching. And the reason you do it in that order is that if you flip them, if you do your tonal work first and then you actually want to do pixel work, you've actually got to create a new copy of your pixel layer with the tonal work baked into it above the tonal work in order for it to show. Then if you have to redo your tonal work, you don't have that flexibility anymore. You have to throw away the layer that you merged all that together with and start from the beginning. If you do your pixel work first and your tonal work on top of it, you can go back in and continue to work on your pixel layer and the tonal work will just be sitting on top of it. Then you can do more tonal work. You can go back and forth between them forever, and one will always allow the correct pass through. So you do those to begin with. Your third in here would be strong color correction. Your color when you start your image should be close to what you want. But then there are colors that people, this client really wants the skin desaturated. That's should be not a permanent part of your master file. That's not something that you want to do in Camera Raw when you're processing the file. That would be something that you would then do at the end, because some people would say, oh yeah, I want a black and white version. Okay, that's another variation at the end. Oh, I want the really desaturated version. That's another variation at the end. I want mine color graded to look like that shitty green shadow and yellow highlight that every movie's done in the past 10 years. That would again be another color correction that sits on top of everything, because it's not the only thing that you're ever going to do with it. Does that sort of make sense? Once you get your color, that part done, then you would actually go into liquify. That's the last step not the last step. After liquify, you can do a whole nother round of these if you need to do any fine tuning, but ultimately your last move in all of this is sharpening for output. So that's the order we're going to work in. I'm not going to do any of the pixel work yet. We'll get to that in a second. I do want to follow up though on the tonal work in here. So our next move is this. A lot of people build an action to actually do this part, but I'm going to do it with you guys a step at a time. We might build an action to encompass all of this next week, but nonetheless, here we go. So I've got my second layer called Pixel Retouch. I'm now going to add an adjustment layer. So if you click on the flyout menu to adjustment layer, we're going to add take that back. We're not going to do adjustment layer. We're just going to do a regular layer on this But before you click on that regular layer, you want to add the option key, and you'll see why in a second. If you were just to click on it, you can click on it right now. It just adds a transparent layer on the top. I'm going to throw that away. I'm going to instead now hold down the option key and click on that. And what ends up happening is that you get a dialog box that opens up that allows you to set this up so that you not only name it, but you can also change your blending modes. You can set it up completely the way it should actually be. So I'm going to call this tonal retouching detail. Some people will call it tonal retouching small. T-O-N-A-L. And then before you say OK, click on your drop-down menu for the mode and change this down to soft light. And then finally, underneath it where it says fills with soft light neutral color, 50% gray, go ahead and check that mark and say OK to this. And what it does is that it builds a layer that's actually named tonal retouching detail. It's also got a blending mode that's set at soft light, and it's also filled with 50% gray. Now, you could do this without the 50% gray part, but the trick to this is that the tonal retouching is so subtle, you can't see it on a transparent layer. If you actually have this filled with gray, you'll see it. You'll see that also the gray has no impact on this because I've got the blending mode set to soft light. In a soft light layer, overlay layer works the very same way. Anything that's 50% gray is completely transparent. Anything that's darker on that level will start actually making your image darker. Anything that's lighter will make your image lighter. So to find out what that means, hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to actually say we're going to do a completely hard brush on this just to make it easier to see. So I'm going to use our drop-down menu, 100% hard brush. Change your blending mode to normal if it wasn't. 100% opacity, 100% flow. And then I'm going to come over to my image and I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. And right now I've got black as my foreground color, and I'm simply going to click on my image and drag down. And you can see it makes my image darker. And this is like a burn in here because you can see the texture is still showing up underneath it. This is a change in tonality alone. Did that work for everyone? Hit the X key to get white your foreground color and do the same trick. And you can see it makes your image lighter. So in theory, we could just use black and white and go back and forth between these two. However, what happens also in soft light layer that you may not know is it also picks up that color to control saturation. So if we were to use black and white to do the retouching, the tonal dodging and burning on this girl's skin, if you start out and it's incredibly light amount, you'll never notice. But if you have to do a heavy amount, what ends up happening is that because you're using black ink and white ink, it ends up desaturating the skin because they have no saturation in them. There is no color in them. And so you're actually adding color as well as making things lighter and darker. So if we leave it as black and white, we're adding black and white as our colors, which is basically desaturates the skin and it just looks gray and dead. You don't want that. So what we need is dodging and burning colors that are based on her skin tone and her skin color. Does that make sense? So we're going to make those. If you've done these two marks on here, we're going to get rid of them. Command Z, Command Option Z will let you go back in 2 steps. So our first move is to actually click on the foreground color. We're going to set up our dodging color first. So I'm going to click on my foreground color picker, and then you just want to pick a tone of skin. I'm just going to click on her chin. Do not pick something that's super highlight. Do not pick something that's super shadow. You just want a general skin color, which is what I've got going on right here, and you can see. What matters to us is this, though. We're going to change this. If you take a look at the hue saturation, all we wanted to do here in our hue saturation brightness, we simply wanted to get the color of her skin, which is a hue of 23. That's what mine is. If yours is slightly off, it doesn't matter. You should be close to that, though. If somebody's got a 35, you hit the wrong thing. Everybody good on this part? So the first thing I'm going to do is change the brightness of this. So I'm going to click on the brightness slider, and remember, my column now becomes the brightness slider. I want to keep this color, but I want a really bright version of it. So I'm just going to grab the 2 little sliding triangles on the bottom, and I'm going to crank them up till I get somewhere between 90 and 95. I make them relatively bright here. Again, I want this to be a dodging color, and the burning color is going to be the opposite and when we get to that part. However, I've still got an enormous amount of tone in here. This is a really rich color here. So I need to change the saturation of it. So I'm going to click on saturation and I'm going to pull the saturation down. Now you don't want to go all the way down. If you go all the way down, you've got a light gray and we're back to the problem that we're having here before. But I tend to keep my saturation kind of in the low teens, and you can see my new color here is going to be an extremely light version of her skin. Did that work for everyone? And say okay. Now we need to make the burning color of this, the thing that's going to make it darker. So I'm going to click on my background color just to open up that color picker. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click right on her skin tone to give me, and I landed really close to where I was before. I've got that 23 degrees for the hue. I'm going to click on my brightness slider, and now I'm going to pull this down because I want to make something darker. But you don't want to go all the way down. If you go down to the bottom, you'll end up with a black. So I'm going to go down to pretty serious darkness in here. I'm around a 15, 16%. That seems correct to me. However, you run into a saturation issue with this. You can actually, this color is really beginning to pale out. It's beginning to lose any sense of the coloring that it actually has. So I'm going to bump the saturation up in this. I'm going to crank it up to make sure that I've actually got good color in there. So if you want the same numbers that I've got a 23 for my hue, that's the color. I've got a 44 for my saturation and a 16 for my brightness. And I'm going to say okay to that. This is now my dodging and burning colors. So now if we take a brush, the B key, and again, just set at the same settings we had before. I've got my my dodging color that's on the top, the lighter the ones. If I click and drag across now, it's actually a lighter color, but it's also laying in the color of her skin. If I hit the X key and go to my burning color, you can see it does the same trick here. It's not quite, it didn't have that same impact that the black ultimately had in here. So this is where I'm going to start for my dodging and burning. I'm going to Command Option Z to go back to get rid of both of those guys. The last thing that we need to change in this is that you need to change the kind of brush you're working with. Your brush needs to be completely soft. So click on your drop-down menu, 0% hardness. And then you need to change the opacity of this down to 6%. Now, I'm going to start with you guys working with opacity. When you get really good at this, you can forget about opacity and change over to flow. Remember the difference here is that with a low opacity, we can put a mark down, but until we lift our cursor up off, under your mouse, lift your stylus off, whatever, and hit it a second time, no density builds. But if you use flow, flow is a density that builds over time. So we want to remove the time element to give you time to actually do this precisely. But so here's the trick. I'm going to show it to you right now. Don't do this. I'm going to let you do it in here in just a second. So I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller so it's about the size of the head of that pimple that's actually on her chin. I do want to start, I'm going to actually try to bring down that highlight just a little bit first. So this is the trick, and this is what you need to know. This is why you have a tablet. The way you do this kind of retouching, you do not ever paint. We're going to get to doing the lines under her eyes, and your temptation is going to be to go in there and paint that line just like you would with a makeup brush. You do not do that. It's dot, dot, dot. Dot, 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 always dots, always dots, always dots. Never stroke, never paint and stroke, never do dots, dots, dots. This is why you have to use a tablet. Because imagine trying to do this. You do this for hours. Do that with a mouse. Your finger will fall off. Do this with a trackpad. You will hate your life. I always tell everybody, I could make $1 million. What I should do is that I'm going to do a Wacom hack. I'm going to find a tattoo gun, and I'm going to put a stylus from a Wacom tablet on it and put that over your tablet just to do the dotting part, right? Because then you're off to the races. It's like, oh, that worked out really well, all right? Because you're going to get really tired of this dot, dot, dot thing. I'm just telling you that right now. All right, so with that all said, let me go back to where I've just got my new layer set up. So here's the trick. So I'm going to start out and show you guys how to do this. One other thing I need to show you first, though, is this. We're working in this image really, really, really close, and you can get blinded to this image as you're working here really close. You need to see this image really close up to be able to do the detail work, but you also need to see a version of this backed off so that you can see, are you having the overall effect that you're actually hoping to have? Because you can get it to completely disappear zoomed in like this, but then when you zoom out, you'll actually spot exactly what's happening. So to get the new version of this, you don't want to make a duplicate of this image, because a duplicate, you'll be working on the retouching image, but the duplicate won't reflect any of the retouching because it's a duplicate. It's a completely separate image. Instead, what we just want is another view of this. To get to that, come up to your window menu, down to arrange. Everybody should do this. Down to new window for Skin Eyes Retouch. And what'll happen is it'll open up a new window here, and these are now identical here. So I'm going to leave one at the sort of like backed off version here. If I click on this version of my image to actually do work, I can still see the pimple. I'm going to do work here. I'm going to show you this really quickly, only because I'm going to crank my opacity all the way back up again. But look what happens. I'll do a really big version of this. When I do this right here, you can see the mark on both images. So again, this is giving you two views of one file. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back to my 6%. And make my brush a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to start on the head of the pimple right now. So dot, 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 and then stop. Hit your X key. This will actually do your lightning version right now. I'm going to make my version around this a little bit larger, and I'm just going to start dotting around this. Again, I'm just tapping, 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 tap, 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 stop, hit the X key to go back for the middle part, tap, tap, tap up in the front, X key to get rid of. And now if you take a look at your backed out version, you can see I've gotten rid of the head of the pimple, but the entire thing, I've now got a little bit darkness on there. So it's more like a really faint mole. It's not a pimple anymore. I'm going to make my brush considerably bigger. And again, make sure that I'm actually pulling this part out. A little bit smaller to that head just lightened up a little too much. I'm using my dodging and burning colors that I made in the very beginning. I'm sorry, what? So I just keep going back and forth using the X keys, because where I need to dodge, I need it to be the lighter color. Where I need to burn, it needs to be the darker color. But you can take a look at my image right now, and if you want to see if this is actually working, I'm going to move this guy over here. You can turn your tonal retouch layer on and off, and you can see you just got rid of the pimple. If you move into the zoomed in version of this, you can actually see you did the same thing. However, I can continue to work on my zoomed in version. It looks like it's still just a touch dark on here, so I'm going to lighten everybody up overall, make it a little bit larger, hit the X key to get my lightning color here, and then just tap over these guys slowly, and that mother is gone. And I have not impacted my retouching, my texture one iota. If you want to see what this looks like, hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball for your retouch detail. That's what got rid of the pimple. Game changer. All right. Turn everybody else back on. We need to move up underneath her eye. So I'm going to come up to the area that's right underneath. I'm looking at her right eye. And if we look at the area that's underneath there, I'm actually going to zoom into this a little bit more. You can see that there are those lines, those small little lines that are underneath her eye. We're going to go after those guys as well. So I'm still, make sure you're working on your tonal detail layer here. I am still working on my tonal detail layer here. I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. About the, again, the width of, I'm looking for something that's about the width of these lines that are in here. I need the lines to be lighter, and this is the reason you do the dots instead of actually doing strokes. Is if you do a stroke, what's going to end up happening is that you'll get the crease, the line that's actually in the middle, but you're also going to get spillover on the outside. And so as you go to make that line in the center part lighter, you're also going to make the areas that are on either side lighter, and so you'll spot it. You'll all of a sudden, the crease will be the color you want it, but it'll be bordered on both sides by something that's too light. If you just do dots, you will actually, again, those dots are curved, they're rounded, so you don't get those hard edge lines in here. So this is what you do for these guys. Again, I'm going to just start on this one that's here at the very bottom here, and I'm just starting to work, and I'm dotting, and I'm just dotting the whole time. So you guys can actually start doing this work with me. So I'm doing that work, and I'm getting impatient about this. I'm saying, well, okay, I just did a whole stroke down there and I don't really see a whole lot of change in here. If you want to see what the difference that you've made, turn your guy on and off and you can see I've made a little bit of a difference, but it's not going quick enough for me. Bump your opacity up. I can take it up to like an 11 or a 12. This may be too much. This may take off on you and go way too fast. So be careful. You're going to stay in those ranges in here. But now as I'm starting to work my way down here, I'm continually just breaking that line up. Again, I'm still got darker areas and lighter areas, but now when I turn this guy on and off, it actually completely removed that line. If you hold on your Option key and you look at your retouching layer, look at what mine looks like. It's these series of dots. It's not this stroke that I've pulled down. The series of dots is what makes this kind of retouching invisible. And there's no other way to do this. Is this not only making sense for everyone, is this working for everyone? I just hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball so it turns everybody else back on and you only see. If you turn on the other layer right here, you see it because again, this layer that we're dealing with, the soft light layer, is actually that all of that gray is transparent in its aggregate, right? The only reason I can see it is I've turned everybody else off, and so there's nothing for it to be more transparent than because I don't have any image that's underneath it. But the reason you fill it is that this allows you to spot this image, to see the issue that you've got going on here, right? Okay, so this is, though, a 50% soft light layer, the area that is around this. So don't do this, because if you've already done this work, I don't want you to undo it. But if you needed to undo something, so let's say you realize that, oh, that line that I just did is wrong. You can actually grab your lasso tool. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool and I'm just going to circle this area that I know it's under this area somewhere in here. I'm working on my tonal retouch layer. Then you can simply go up to the edit menu, down to fill, and you can fill this with 50% gray, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and okay. And it brings it all back. What I just did was filled that area that I just done that with 50% gray. That's what everything on my image on the soft light layer is, that's not changing anything. So it just removes that part for me. You could also change your foreground color to be 50% gray and paint this out. But I like keeping my foreground and background colors to my retouching where I want them. I'm going to go back in time to where that guy was again so that I've got the retouching. Is this making sense, everybody, what we're doing so far? Okay, a couple of caveats in this. There is, in that very same area, if you look right under her eye, there's a little white spot that's right underneath her eye. I want everybody to burn that white spot in until it goes away. So again, I'm going to go to my burning color, hit the B key to actually get my tool and make it slightly larger. And I'm just going to start hammering on it. And now what I have is the same white dot that's actually framed with a really black one, a really dark one. I not only didn't get rid of it, I made it worse because now I've got a target that's circled around it. I built a frame for it. That's all I did. Why did that happen? It's because this dot is white. You can't dodge white into anything. It's white. I can take a tone and make it darker, but I can't. I got nothing in there. There's no tone. There's nothing in here for me to make this darker than. And that's what we're doing here. This is true dodging and burning. I'm not replacing this. Does that make sense what's going on here? So the message to this is that there are spots on your image that can be too light to dodge, or too light to burn, or too dark to dodge. And you need to figure those out because we need to attack those a different way. So again, I've got this huge mistake that's on here. To fix it, I'm going to hit the L key to get the lasso tool. I'm just going to circle this guy and then fill that again with 50% gray to remove it. Command D to deselect. Instead, now what I have to do is I've got to go to pixel retouching. That is the only way that I can get this guy to actually go. I need to replace this. Make sense? So to do this, I'm going to go to my pixel retouching layer. I am going to do this using the healing brush tool. So I'm going to grab the J key to actually do that. Mine keeps picking the patch tool when I do it, but I'm going to do the regular healing brush, not spot healing, but the regular healing brush. I'll make the tool much smaller. But also, I don't want to change anything that is around the sides of this image. So most people will go in and just hit this with the healing brush tool and call it a day. I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to use blending modes to restrict this. So if I change my healing brush blending mode, so up here at the blending modes of your brush, of your tool, up in the options panel, click on the drop-down menu and say, I only want to darken this. So that if I use the healing brush tool here, if I sample from just outside it and it's this skin tone and I come in here to replace it, it won't impact anything that's just outside of that little white. The edges around here, it won't change that at all because it's no darker or lighter than the area that's around this. Does that make sense? So your goal in this is that if you do have to go to the clone stamp tool or healing brush tool, you want to do minimal damage. And using blending modes for that tool will help keep this to a minimum. So I'm going to sample just lower to this. The other thing you want to do is think about this way. These things are important. You could look at this and say, okay, well, you can pick the sample place for the source that you're going to use to replace this. What I want to do is take something that's very light and make it darker. So what I want to do is I want to pick the lightest skin tone that will achieve this, because it results in the least amount of change. If I pick dark skin, so if I'm picking light skin, I've got light skin that's happening right up in here. I've got much darker skin that's over here. A lot of people will say it doesn't matter which one you pick. It does. If I pick the lighter part up here as my source, then the change that I'm making is less extreme than if I pick my dark area down here that is a source. That is going to be a much more extreme change, and I want to keep this to a minimum. Make sense? So I'm going to hold down the option key up here. I'm going to click on this and I'm simply going to fill that in and it gets rid of it. So we have talked about doing this. There's other places on here that you're going to need to do that with. There's other little lines on here. Again, a lot of the light areas that are down in here on her skin is all tonal, but there are these little white dots that are not tonal. Yes? And you click on the white dot. So do you have your pixel retouching layer selected? Do you have your brush set to darken or lighten? Actually go up to normal and see if it works then. Need to worry about what you just did because you just retouched 50% gray on top of 50% gray. Did that work? Yep, good. Okay, so there's other areas around here that actually still need that, but do not go after this whole image and all of these light places in this image. You can spot the little white parts here that do need to be fixed, but all of the real bumpy skin around here, this is all retouching tonally. So again, to see how that works, I'm going to zoom into here. 500% is too much. I'm going to stick it around 300%. And I'll just show you how I start to work on this. And we'll do it pretty quick because I got one last thing to show you, but we're doing pretty good time-wise, or at least I think so. So I'm going to go back to my brush, the B key. I'm going to change my opacity back to that 6% for skin that's about this tone you want to work here. As we start getting into even subtler changes in skin tone, I'll get down around 1 or 2% in my opacity. Don't be afraid to go down there. If you're working around 20%, everybody's going to see you're retouching. So this is how I start. I pour myself a very large glass of wine. I put on some good music. I wish I could watch a movie while I do this, but I can't. So I settle in, comfy chair. And then again, I'm going to pick a brush, the B key. I'm going to make it about the size of this, the grain that's actually in her face right in here, a little bit smaller than this. I typically start with lightening. It's just the way I start. So I'm going to make things a little bit lighter. So I'm just tapping now randomly. Keep moving fast. Do not stay in one place. Do not try to get one thing perfect. Just start to move around as much as you can, sort of in this small little confined area. And again, I'm tapping the whole time. Tap, 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 tap. It's non-stop tapping that actually is happening in here. Keep moving a lot really fast. Don't stop in here and all this kind of stuff. I'm bored with this. Hit the X key to go to your burning colors and then start to lightly work in some of the burning stuff here to actually even out this skin tone. Again, there's a couple of highlight spots in here that are a little bit too light. X key to go back to my dodging color here. And then you look at it and you say, well, fuck, this has, and I haven't done a thing here. But then turn your layer on and off, and you can see you've done massive things. And you just need to keep doing this. It's time intensive. That's all I can tell you. It's how it is. Questions about this? Okay. Last part I want to get to really quickly here is the cigarette burn that's on her cheek. I just call it that because it sounded really kind of, I don't know, it wakes everybody up. You know, cigarette burn on her cheek. Okay, this is pixel retouching, so back to your pixel retouching layer, the second one down. There are 3 ways to go about fixing this guy. We're going to go through all 3 of them really quick and decide which one we all agree on that we actually like. So the first way to do it is using the tool that we've actually got right now. If we hit the J key, we've already selected the healing brush tool. Make sure in this case you change your blending mode back to normal, because this has got areas that are lighter. It's got areas that are darker. I want to use my brushes completely normal on this. Again, I'm going to leave it only working on my current layer because that's all I'm working on. I'm going to make this brush larger, not completely giant, but larger here. You've got places that you can pick a source from. I'm going to either do it from sort of, if you imagine, again, this is a clock face. If you do an extension out from like 2 o'clock, there would be a place up in here I could grab for source, or down here in the bottom part down here, the flying off of like the 7 o'clock. The thing to keep in mind about this is that if any of these areas are in a different focal plane than what you're trying to fix, you need to find sources that have the same focus as your destination. So if the cheek, for instance here, if you look down at the bottom of her cheek down here, as the cheek recedes away from the camera, it gets softer. So the skin that's down here has actually got a softer texture than the area that's right up here. This has actually got sharp texture, so you need to match that texture. So I'm going to start with this stuff. I'm going to do it at down on the sort of 7 o'clock below this. I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to click to do a sample, and this is critical. So when we go to do this patch, you need to cover the entire patch in one stroke. And the reason that you need to do that is, look what happens. I'm going to only do half of mine right here. What happens is that it then, so it replaces the texture. That's fine. But then it looks at the area around this to try to blend in the color and the tone. And it uses part of the dark cigarette burn to blend into this. I'm trying to get rid of that dark tone. So instead of doing it halfway like that, I'm going to hit Command Z, you cover the entire patch, everything. And you can go out bigger than it needs to be, but you cover the whole thing. This is my first removal, and I'm going to do a snapshot in history of that. So over to your history palette, click on the little camera, and I'm going to call this healing brush, HB, and say OK to that, and then hit Command Z to undo that. Our second method is, again, the same drop-down menu for healing brush tool, but it's going to be the spot healing brush tool. Now, in this case, Photoshop actually picks this for you. The one thing that you want to make sure is that your edge of your brush is 50% hardness, mine is, a normal blending mode, and that the type is set to content aware. And then you simply come over to your image and go try to set a sample point. Hold down your Option key and click. You will get this warning that comes up saying, this tool doesn't let you do that. Photoshop is going to pick this for you. So say cancel. And in this case, simply paint over the entire cigarette burn again. Make sure you cover it all again. Let go, and then do a history snapshot of this. And we're going to call it SHB, Spot Healing Brush, and say OK to that. Command Z to undo it. Again, we've got a history state of what it looks like, so we're going to be able to go back and check it out. And then finally, the last of the tools that we use in the healing set is the patch tool. And if you pick the patch tool, the way this tool works, it's unlike the other two. In this one, you actually pick the destination first, and you drag it to the source that you want. So to use it, it's a lasso tool. You grab the lasso tool, and you want to make sure that you select the entire cigarette burn as well as the shitty makeup job that was done to cover it. You now have marching ants, and you will see your cursor changes to, it looks like marching ants with arrows that are pointing off of it. That's telling you you need to now drag this to another spot. You drag it to the source that you want to use to fix this destination. So I'm simply going to, again, drag it down. Now, if I haven't let go yet, but you look at it and you say, well, Versher, that's too dark. Remember, the first move is to replace texture. That's what's going to happen. The second move will be then to try to blend it in to the color and the tone that's around it. Let go, Command D to deselect, and we're going to do a history snapshot of that, and we're going to call this Patch Tool, PT. Then Command Z to undo that. Command Z, Option Z to go back to where you get the cigarette burn. Command D to deselect. Scroll up to the top of your history palette, and you've got 3 history states that we can look at. We can look at the regular healing brush tool, not bad. Spot healing brush tool, obvious. I'm picking up really some weird shit in there. And then a patch tool. For me, it's between the patch tool and the healing brush. I'm going to go back to the healing brush, and actually, in my case, like the healing brush better here. But I got to be honest with you, every single time I do this, it ends up being either the patch tool or healing brush tool. It just depends on what you picked. Which one do you guys think is better? Healing brush? Then you stick with this healing brush and save your work. And this is how you begin. So, last thing I want to show you really quickly, because I've got 5 minutes to do it, is what you're in store for. There is one other thing I want to point out really quickly here first. I'm going to stick with Photoshop again, so go back to Photoshop really quickly for me. I got to show this to you first. So, we're going to zoom back out just a little bit. And you can see there's a shadow, sort of like, it's not really a mustache, but there's a shadow that's actually on the top of her face that's up in here. This whole area that's right in here, I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit more. And you can see, this is actually, and there's another dark area that's right in here. There's a second part that you do for the retouching tonally. The first one is to take care of the detail. It's to take care of all that pebbly skin, get rid of the pimple. It's to do all of that. The second version of this, though, it works more like foundation for makeup. People's skin, it's inherently just blotchy. It's not this even skin tone. The purpose of foundation is to even that skin tone out. We do the same thing retouching. We are going to even out the darker and lighter areas, but they're larger areas. That's not this tonal detail work that we're doing. You do not want to do that on the same layer as your detail work, because let's say that you spent 8 hours doing all of your detail work, and then you spend 20 minutes doing this larger tonal work on the same layer, and you fuck it up, you go too far. Your only recourse is to get rid of all of your tonal detail work and start over. If you do these on separate layers, then if you screw up the large tonal work, you don't have to redo all the detail stuff. Make sense? So I'm going to really quickly, on top of all of this, make another layer, a tonal retouching layer. Hold down your Option key, click on Add Layer. We're going to call this Tonal Retouch Large. Again, drop down blending mode, change it to soft light. Again, fill it with 50% gray, say okay to that. And this is now the one that you would work on to do this work. It's the same way, the B key to get a brush, make it larger. In this case, 6% is probably gonna be a little hard on this, so I'm gonna go down to around a 2 or 3%, something like that. I've got my dodging color that's on here, and it's still the same thing. Do not stroke this like a paintbrush. Tap, tap, tap. All the way along here like this to open that up. Very subtle. It just lifted that. I'm actually going to go after this area right in here that's on the side of her skin right here. And then you can see, I'm going to hold down my Option key just to show you guys what I'm doing. You can see it's very subtle. It's much larger areas, very subtle in here what's actually going on compared to the tonal detail work, which is this stuff that's like insanely fine and all of that. Make sense? All right, so everybody look at my screen right here. You won't see this, but I do want to show this to you. I really didn't want to show you my email, but. How do you know when you've done enough? Do you guys, if you look in your assignment folder, do you have reference images by any chance? 2 PNGs. This is what a good large tonal retouching mask, layer will ultimately look like. And this is what a detailed one will look like. Ours. To show you, just so that you know you're not the only people that have ever suffered through this, I'm going to show you one that's very well done. Sorry, I don't know if this is one or not. No. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we'll just try anybody's in here. There's a couple of good sets that are in here. So if we take a look at this, sorry. Good solid texture still on her skin. If this is her detail work right there. This is her tonal large right here. And zip back out so you can really sort of see what's going on in here. But check this out. This is all done tonally. Before, after, before, after. Makes sense? This is what her tonal retouch detail layer looks like. You have any idea how long it takes to do that? This is insane, but this is what you do. Questions about this? Yes. Yes, so the hair is part of the assignment. You do not have to do the hair because we didn't get to it. Anything else? Questions? Are we good on this part? Okay. I'll see you guys next week.